that cool? I didn't make it. Yeah, that's not mine. I found it online. I was like, oh, that's really cool. So sometimes you just need a little time to like bring a table in and kind of, okay, get ready and stuff. And so, but can you imagine what it was like to live during the time of Joshua? And that would be incredible. That would be incredible. Okay, I want to give a little bit of a building update. So Wednesday night, I went home and I had something in my hand, and Abby was doing some homework on the couch, and I said, Abby, guess what I have in my hand? And she looks up and she's kind of half thinking about her homework, and she says, what? And I said, I've got a check in my hand for $1.7 million. And she says, and goes back, wait, really? Now, if you know Abby, that's exactly Abby right there. So Thursday morning went in, closed on our new building, so we own a new building. That's right. That's awesome. You know, the crazy thing is there was only like 10 pieces of paper to sign an initial. When we bought our home, well, it's because we had the mortgage in the bank. They had like this whole list of stuff. And I went in there and I like signed 10 pages and I'm like, gosh, $1.7 million and this is it? But it's because we were able to pay cash. And so, I mean, that building is ours and we don't have a mortgage payment on that. So that's pretty amazing. So now the fun begins, okay? So this Wednesday night, we are going to go to the building. It's 2801 Louisiana. You can look on the calendar on the church website. We have an announcement slide that kind of shows basically shows we're going to have a walkthrough and prayer on Wednesday night. I'll walk through everybody, and now when you get there, there's a lot of stuff that's good, and then there's some stuff that just needs fixing up or expanded or whatever. It's not like a dump, so you're not going to go in and there's cobwebs everywhere and like scary voodoo dolls or anything like that. We're going to go in, and it's basically ready to walk in now, but there's a lot of stuff that just needs to be cleaned, painted. The landscaping is kind of messed up and stuff, and so like this week, there's a bunch of contractors that are coming in. So Wednesday night, we'll go through, we'll try and cast some vision for that, and then we'll go around and pray. And our intercessors are like, let's go get that place, because it was the center of spiritual living. And we love those people, but let's just say that their beliefs are a little different than ours. And so we're just going to pray for that building, pray for that place, and just basically set it aside for God. The other thing we're going to do is we've got a couple work days. So one in October and one in November, basically anybody can show up. We'll find something for you to do. We'll have a whole list of things to do. Our admin team is walking through this Wednesday to really go through and kind of come up with a checklist. Between that and what the contractors are going to do and stuff, there's a lot to be done. Trust me, you show up, we'll find something for you to do. It's always fun to work with your church, getting a new building ready and everything. The last thing is because of all the changes, so our mission for our church is to reach young families. Now, we had a young family starting to come in before COVID, and then it kind of fizzled out because families didn't want to bring their kids in, and like kids are like the big incubator. I mean, schools are your kids go to school, one kid gets it, and then by the end of the week, everybody in the family has it. And so that kind of happened during COVID, is one kid would get it and they'd get sick and stuff. And so we need some kids workers. We actually need 7 kids workers. You'll be serving once a month. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to have a nursery/nursing mother's room that we're going to work or start when we move into the new building. We're going to have a pre-elementary class and an elementary class. And so we need workers for those. Right now, all we have is an elementary class, and we have like 3 to 4 workers each week for that. So if you're thinking about where can I volunteer, where can I help, we have to get a background check of you. Got to make sure that you're not like a serial killer or anything like that. We don't want our kids learning from you. It's quick training. It is easy. And you want to talk about like fertile ground for learning. I mean, if you say Jesus is Lord, they're going to believe you. If you say, hey, Jesus loves you, they're going to believe you. I mean, they're just ready, and so you can start them on that path. Okay, the second thing, or the last thing, is I just wanted to kind of gossip the good, a little bit of good that's going on in this church. Have you noticed there's been a change in the atmosphere of worship? I mean, I've heard that from so many people, and all I can say is it's God. God came in when we needed him most, and there's been a change in the atmosphere of worship. People are more engaged. Our numbers have gone up. Go figure. I don't know what that's about. We have a new kids lead in Stephanie Blackwell, and I meant to get a picture up here of her, but I forgot. I'm sorry, Stephanie. And she is super enthusiastic. I've been meeting with her about every Friday, talking through different stuff. She's got vision probably for 5 years out. I mean, like, she is on fire, and so you want to serve under someone that's on fire, sign up for kids. And then another thing is our youth have been kind of coming in. We have young people that are coming in and really starting to get engaged. Drew Perry, she led worship a couple weeks ago. I mean, Ashlyn was up here. Ashlyn's a little older than a young person, but she's still young. She was leading a song this morning, and there's just areas that young people are helping out with. And then we also have a new pastoral couple that's Eloy and Sharon. Can you guys raise your hand and wave? They are our new pastoral care leads. So if you're sick, you're in the hospital, someone dies in your family or whatever, they're going to be the ones that are going to be contacting you and helping you through the process and stuff. We've needed that. I mean, Jim Curtis used to do that before he died, and we've actually been trying to find the right people. So they're going to be working with small group leaders. So if someone in your small group gets sick and ends up in the hospital, and you know about it, you need to talk to them. And then they'll also be working with the intercessor team so that these people are getting prayer, they're getting cared for, and their small group is rallying around them, loving on them, and visiting them and stuff. That sounds like a good plan back to health, doesn't it? Yeah, that's the way the Bible's supposed to work, is we're supposed to rally around people that are sick or that are mourning or whatever, and we're supposed to mourn with them, and we're supposed to pray for their healing. So those are just some of the good things that are going on in the church. And then the new building. I mean, gosh, it is a good time to be part of City Church. All right, we're going to continue our message from Joshua. I will tell you, and I was talking with Yo Snyder. He did a great job last week of talking about Rahab and the spies. Yeah. There was some stuff I learned and some perspectives. Yo always has a little bit different perspective. He's a theologian, really loves to dig into kind of doctrines and stuff like that. But yet he pulls that together with pop culture, and there's always this thing and stuff. And I was like, how's he going to handle this prostitute thing and stuff? And I thought he did a really good job with it. I have found this week to be difficult for me to lay out everything. So if I go off schedule, if I go off into something different, bear with me, because sometimes this has happened in the past, and I'm like, God, there must be something else that you're trying to say that maybe isn't in my notes. And that's a good thing in some ways. I'm an engineer. I like notes. I like planning ahead. I like plans, organization, all that stuff. But God sometimes says, I'm just going to mess up your plans. So he may do that today. Let me make this a little bigger. As I've gotten older, this funny thing has happened called losing my eyesight. Only when I read, I can still see you guys. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth. So it's the Lord of all the earth. The ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over ahead of you into the Jordan. Now then, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one man from each tribe. And it will come about when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, I repeated it, rest in the waters of the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan will be cut off, that is, the waters which are flowing down from above, and they will stand in one heap. So just to give you a picture, there's mountains in northern Israel. You can actually ski on Mount Hermon. You can go skiing on Mount Hermon. And you're like, in Israel? Yes, in Israel. Israel is such a diverse area, and so a lot of the waters come down from those mountains and they go down the Jordan River, and the Jordan River basically splits Israel right down the middle. And some of the tribes lived on the east side of the river, and some of the tribes lived on the west side of the river. And so you have to understand, when they're talking about Israel, when they talk about the West Bank, it's a portion on the west bank of the Jordan. And right now, that's kind of disputed territory, you might say. But the Jordan River came down, and toward, like right before the big nasty desert starts, or right about where it starts, is Jericho. And Jericho is like the entrance. If you came in from Egypt, from I guess from your side, Egypt's down in Africa, and if you go up, it was like the big traveling corridor between Africa and Europe and Asia. You basically had to go through Israel. So Israel had all these roads going through it, and so the big empire of Egypt would go through, and the big empire of Babylon would go through, and then the Romans went through, and everybody went through Israel, and Israel's just like this little agricultural community, and they're always getting trampled on by these great big empires. But yet God was their God, and he sustained them. So the Jordan River comes down. Well, at the southern part is Jericho, and when you get south of Jericho, it is desert, and I'm talking like bare, not a plant to be seen, not even a little wispy desert-like plant like we see here, but I mean nothing. And you have to like hunt into the little canyons and stuff, and then you'll find like a little spring. And so all of the Bedouins, they would take their sheep and stuff, and they would go to the different springs, and they would feed their sheep there, because there was water that God had provided basically out of the ground, and then there was always some sort of agriculture there that they could eat. So Jericho's down there, and Jericho's a walled city, and it sat on one side of the Jordan River, basically on the west side of the Jordan River, and the Israelites had ended up on the east side of the Jordan River. So that's basically what it's. Jordan River's a good-sized river. It's not like the Mississippi, but it's also not like the Rio Grande, somewhere in between. This is a promise, this first verse, and it will come about when the soles of your feet. Now that's an allusion we talked about when we talked about Joshua 1, that God says, I'm going to send you into the land, be strong and courageous, and he says, and wherever the soles of your feet go, I'm going to give you that land. And God is reminding the Israelites, hey, when you cross the Jordan, that's your first step, and that's where your soul is going to hit. And I'm going to do a miracle. I'm going to part the waters so that even the land under the waters gets touched by the soles of your feet. God says, this is what's going to happen if you do what I say. Now, what happened if they just camped on the east side of the Jordan River? You think the river would have ever? No. This is what's going to happen if you do what I say. You can keep wandering, or you can do what I say, and you're going to see miracles. You know what God's saying to this church? You can keep wandering. You can keep doing your own thing. You can keep trying to be. I'm not saying we are this way, but in general, you keep trying to play church. You can keep trying to be the best church out there, or you can do what I say. Now, God's path leads to miracles. The other path leads to wandering around and doing our own thing and playing church and doing stuff like that. God wants to do some miracles in our lives. Why? Because then he gets credit. If we're in the desert, yeah, we're going to get credit. All those Israelites, they're wandering around in the desert. We don't want to be like them. But here's a miracle that comes along. So let me ask you, where does God want you to go, and where does God want us to go as a church? So God's activity comes along, and this is what he says. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. However, there shall be a distance between you and it of about 2,000 cubits by measurement. Do not come near it, so that you may know the way by which you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do miracles among you. So when we look at that verse, So the first verse that I read about them going out and crossing the river when the soles of your feet, that's actually later on in the chapter. But I wanted to give you the big picture that they're going to have to cross the river. So now going back to the beginning, God says to the people, he says, you're going to be in your tents, you're just going to be hanging out, and all of a sudden you're going to see the priest pick up the ark and start moving. When, not if, but when, which implies that you better be looking. There's a story in the New Testament about like Jesus is going to return, and it says those that had a watchful eye, they recognized that it was coming. When, so are you watching for God's activity? Or are we just sitting and we show up on Sundays and we're like, God, Jeff, you just go so long. Would you please stop preaching so I can go home and watch football? I was actually quoting myself because I'm like, Jeff, slow down. You want to go home and watch football. Do we come to church with this enthusiasm like, I want to see God. I want to hear God. You know what this reminded me of? As he was going along the Sea of Galilee, when you see it, and then it says, go after it. So you better be looking, but then as soon as you see it, pack up your bags, it's time to move. It's not, when you see it, go, and then go pray about it. And then go have a council and, well, should we follow the Lord of the covenant? And no, go after it. I've already told you, God spoke, go do it. So this reminds me of when Jesus was at the Sea of Galilee. He saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net in the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will have you become fishers of people. We've heard that verse. The key part is the next part. Immediately, they left their nets and followed him. Think about that. God comes to you, you're sitting at work one day. Now, if you have a cruddy job, you might be like, okay, I'm going with God. And God says, I want you to go, and I want you to go do this. I want you to leave your job, and I want you to go to Africa, or I want you to go pastor this church in this little tiny town of Arizona, or whatever it happens to be that God's calling you to. You're sitting at your desk, and you're typing on your computer, and God comes along. Would you just drop everything and go? No, we'd want to turn in our 2 weeks notice so that we make sure we don't burn any bridges. We want to leave that opportunity that we can come back and, hey, maybe I should make it a full month. That way we have time to kind of process this and we can sell our house and we can do all this stuff. No, they left their nets and they followed him. Same image. God says, when you see that ark, you better get going. You have to be looking. There's a story about a policeman. He sees this drunk, and he's under this light. It's at night, and he's searching around under the street light for something. And he's going back and forth, and he's hobbling and stuff, and the policeman just sits back, and he's watching him. And he goes up to the drunk, and he says, have you lost something? And the drunk says, well, yeah, I lost my keys, and I can't find them. And so they look around for a while, and they look around, and the policeman can't find them. And he's like, well, where did you lose them? He's like, over there in the park. Well, why are you searching here? Because there's light here. And that's all he could see. He couldn't see over in the park where it was dark. We have to go where the light is. And we will find what God is wanting us to find. We need to go where the light is. So the second thing it says, stay at a distance. Now at first I was like, well, God, don't you want the people close to you and stuff? Have you ever followed someone home, like you met them at work and you're going to go to their house for dinner and they're like, oh, just follow me. And so you're driving along, and then they get further and further and further away from you. And then if they get too far away from you, you hit that red light, and they keep going, and you're like, come on, I'm stuck at the light. Everybody here has probably experienced that at one time. The other part of that is if you're too close and you're right on their tail, they switch lanes, and all of a sudden they're on the off-ramp, and you're like, I can't get over because there's this big truck in the way. And God says, I want you to just hang back a little bit. Just follow me. Keep your eyes on me. You don't know where we're going. It literally says, you've never been this way before. Let me lead. So we have to lead. So we have to hang back a little bit and let God lead. Now, we can approach the throne of grace. We can approach God, and we can have our quiet times and stuff. But sometimes God says, all right, I want you to do this. Imagine when David was basically called by God to become king, if David is like, done, I'm going for it. And he pulls out his sword and he goes over and he kills Saul. Well, that would have messed up the whole Bible. I mean, God didn't want David to act. He wanted him to watch and wait on him. So the first step is to follow God and get our eyes on God when he starts to move. And the second step is that we got to have a little distance and not try and do it ourselves. It's okay to let God open the door for you. We don't have to go up and knock on every single door until we find one open. We go in there and it's a closet. That's usually what happens. So we go in there and we're like, oh, God, I thought you said I was going to be king. I mean, David was in a cave down in that desert. He was in a cave down in the desert. I wonder if he thought, boy, how did I get here? Are the promises of God real and true? Well, they are, because we can read in Psalms about what he felt about that. That he was waiting on God and he trusted God and he saw that God had a plan. And it was not just a plan for David's life, it was an eternal plan. And he wrote Psalms that spoke about God's eternal plan. And David knew that it wasn't just about him. And you guys have to know it's not just about you. And it's not just about City Church. There has to be something that we understand that we're aligning with God, we're moving forward, and we're following him because we're one little piece of this puzzle of God's eternal plan. God spoke to Moses between the two cherubim that were the lid on the Ark of the Covenant. Inside the Ark, it was the stones of the Ten Commandments, which was like God's instructions. And there was Aaron's rod, which was like God's correction. And then there was a pot of manna, which was like God's provision. So the whole character of God is this ark. And God is saying, watch me. Watch me move. Third thing he says is consecrate yourselves. Check your heart to make sure that you're ready to see God move. I think a lot of us are not ready to see God move. For one, maybe we're so distracted, or we've become so hard-hearted, or I used a word a couple weeks ago, comfortable with life as it is, that we're not even wanting something new. We're going to the same daily thing. I go to the same Starbucks every day. I'm such a routine guy. Gosh, I love routine. Oh, thank you, Jesus, for routine. I am such a routine guy. When I go up to the speaker and I say, I want a grande mocha and a blueberry muffin, they say, hey, Jeff. And everybody in that store knows me. You know what the cool thing is? Out of my routine, God has opened that place up that I've been able to share Christ with people there. And I can walk in there and they're all like, hey, Jeff, and stuff. And my girls just shake their head like, you are addicted to Starbucks. But the truth is that God used my personality and my character and just the person that I am because he made me. He made it so that I overanalyze and take 5 years to buy a pencil. But I'll tell you, my pencil never breaks. And that, I mean, yes, all researchers unite, yes. Right now I'm raising my nerd flag. But we have to check our hearts and we have to say, God, do I really want you to work in my life? Because if you work in my life, then that means I have to change. God ain't changing. You know, but here's the thing. When God gets involved, even the rocks cry out. When God gets involved, the trees clap their hands. When God gets involved, mountains move and rivers part. And that's what we really want. That's deep down inside of us. That's the thing that's stirring up that we really want. Honestly, if we really sat in bed at night and thought about it, we would say, God, I am tired of the boredom of human life. and I've got to see into heaven, and I've got to see your miraculous, because that's real life. That's reality. And what we see here is a facade. It's something that's fake. It's not real. And what the world tells us is valuable is not real. Money's not valuable. The biggest home's not valuable. You know what's valuable? Sitting with my family at home and talking and joking. I have a picture on my phone. You're not going to be able to see it. It's Joy and Rachel and Abby when they were little. And they're sitting on our bed, and they got their feet out in front of them. There you can see it. And on their feet, I don't remember if it was for my birthday or for Father's Day, they put, "We love Daddy." Is that awesome? That is eternity. At least in my heart it is. But God wants to do something that goes beyond what we can see and what the world tells us is important. And he says, I'm going to do wonders. Now, I always ask this, what is a wonder? It's things that make you wonder. Like, how in the world did that happen? Like, it makes people wonder. So I looked it up. This is kind of a cool word. This is a Hebrew word. It means Pele. Now, if you know Pele was like the greatest soccer player that ever lived. There are arguments and stuff. But the word for wonders is Pele. And I'm like, well, that fits. I mean, I'm a soccer fan, and I mean, he used to juggle oranges when he was a little kid in Brazil. He grew up very poor, and he would juggle oranges with his feet. He'd just sit there for hours and just juggle oranges. And that's how he got to be so good at soccer. And he won World Cups and won national titles and stuff with Brazil. But the word Pele has kind of three different meanings. The first one is wonderful, the second one is extraordinary, and the third one is difficult. So wonderful. Like, it brings wonder. It brings excitement. I think of wonderful as like, it's the most wonderful time. I mean, Christmas brings excitement. I know, we have Rachel just says, it's not Christmas yet. That's our rule. Our girls used to sing Christmas songs so much and play Christmas music all year round. I was like, I can't take it anymore. And so from Thanksgiving weekend, from that Wednesday night when you get home from school, until January 1st, you can listen to Christmas music as much as you want. But the rest of the year, nope. If you want your dad to be a sane man, you cannot listen to Christmas music in June. When we're sitting on a beach in San Diego, that's actually where we were, and they started singing Christmas music, and I was like, I can't take it anymore. Like, sing the Beach Boys. But it should be wonderful. So anyhow, I started singing that song, and Rachel says, it's not Christmas yet. We should be excited because it's wonderful. What God's going to do is wonderful. The activity of God is to prosper us. It's not to harm us. This is out of Jeremiah 29. It's to prosper us. It's not to harm us. It's to give us a future and a hope. It's for good and not for evil. Second thing is it's extraordinary. God is going to do something that is out of the ordinary. It's not something that we can do. If it was something that we could do, we wouldn't need God. The Israelites couldn't cross that river without God. They weren't bridge builders. They weren't masons in that way. You want to know another way of saying that? This is not something that's happened this way before. God's going to do something a different way than you've ever seen it. How many stories of Jesus spitting into the dirt and making mud and putting it on a blind man are there in the Bible? There's one. How many stories are there of Jesus being on the Sea of Galilee, and it's in the middle of a storm, and he says, peace, be quiet? One. God wants us to rely on him instead of doing it the same way every single time. Otherwise, we wouldn't need him. If Jesus, like if there was a rule, okay, if there's a blind man that comes up to me, all you have to do is spit in the dirt, put the mud on his eyes, if he lets you. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'd rather be blind. It probably depends on who's spitting in the dirt. I know, that image just popped into everybody's head. Sorry, I apologize. Get thee behind me, Satan. If there was a rule that every time a blind man came up, all you had to do was, we wouldn't need God. But when someone comes up to us, we have to say, God, what is it that you're doing? What is the activity that's going on? How do you want to heal this person? Do you want to heal this person? Is now the time? We knew a lady named Frankie Brandon, and she prayed for the lady across the street. I've told this story many times, but it's just mind-boggling to me. And for like 19 years, every day she'd get up in the morning and she'd say, hey, is today the day that so-and-so is supposed to be saved? And she wouldn't hear anything from God. Okay. Is today the day that so-and-so is supposed to be saved? Like something like 19 years, every day she prayed that. And one day she's having her quiet time and she says, God, is today the day that so-and-so is supposed to get saved? And God says, yes. Speaks to her mind. She closes her Bible, jumps up, gets dressed, goes across the street. She's banging on the door. Lady opens the door, and Frankie points at her and says, today, God told me that you were going to accept him as your Lord and Savior. Are you ready to pray? I mean, that's boldness. But that was 19 years of waiting on God for his voice. And so there was a desperation in her for probably 18 years and 364 days of like, God, are you going to speak? Are you going to speak? Am I going to stay in this cave? Am I going to be out in the desert? Am I going to be wandering? Or God, are you going to come down? You're going to speak, and today is going to be the day. So when she was looking out, she was waiting for the ark to move. And boom, it moved, and she went across, and she saw a miracle. You know what her faith was like after that? It was like huge. And that's what we need. We need to get to a point where we're like, I am tired of this routine. I need God. And God's not going to do it the same way that he did it for Pastor Matt or Pastor Jeff. He's going to do it the way he's going to do it for you. And you're the only one that can hear from God to know that you're supposed to do it that way. So are you seeking God? Are you at the tent door looking out, keeping a watch out? And then if you are you going to step out or are you going to stay comfortable? That's what it means to consecrate ourselves, is getting rid of the small thinking. You know, God, you're big enough that I don't know how you're going to do this, but you're going to do it. And I'm not going to do it. And if anybody pats me on the back for it, I'm going to point them back to you and say, there's no way I could do that. God, the God of all the earth, did that. So here's 3 things that God's activity does. Number 1 is it increases our faith. This is awesome. And Joshua said, by this you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will assuredly drive out from you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Parasite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. All the sites, they're gone. That you would know that God is among you. We all struggle with that. God, are you really with me? Do you care about me? Am I like in obscurity? Do you know my name? Bible says you know my name, but like I haven't seen you move, I haven't seen you act, anything like that. Well, it's probably not God. It's probably us. And we say, do I have enough faith? And so God says, okay, I'm going to make this easy on you. I'm going to give you just enough faith for you to share Christ with your coworker at work and just say, hey, how can I pray for you? And the coworker says, oh, well, I've been having this stomach issue and stuff. You can pray for me. And so we go home and we pray, and God heals the coworker. And the coworker's like, hey, you know, after I told you to pray for me, my stomach's been a lot better. And our faith increases. There's a scripture in Romans that says, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, or the good news. I'm not ashamed of the good news of God. Are we ashamed to share the good news that God has done? For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. So when we share the good news, people believe in God. So when we share, hey, I'm crossing the Jordan River and I'm going on dry land, people are going to believe. But are they going to believe when we just pray because they've been dealing with stomach issues, or their marriage is struggling? I prayed for a guy that I play soccer with. He and his wife were really struggling, like close to divorce. And I said, I won't say his name. I'm going to pray for you every day until you tell me that your marriage is doing better. You know how long it took? A week. A week. And he says, yeah, we had this great big talk and kind of worked out. And he says, I realized that I was being like more of the friend to the kids, and she was being more of the disciplinarian. We just talked through it, and everything's so much better. And I was like, a week? Well, come on, God. Couldn't you stretch it out for 19 years? No, God wanted to give me a little bit of faith. And then if you continue on in that verse, it says, for it is in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. So you want to know how to have great faith? You have a bunch of little faith. And if you get a bunch of little faith, pretty soon it adds up. If I gave you a pebble for every little faith act that you had, pretty soon you'd have a bucket full of faith. And then suddenly your faith is bigger. So then I'm giving you stones. And pretty soon you have a wheelbarrow full of faith. And then a truckload full of faith. And pretty soon you got this big pile of faith. More than you ever thought you would have. It goes from faith to faith. So when God's activity is around and he moves, our faith increases. Even if it's just a little bit. So be faithful in that. I am spitting a lot today. Sorry. Front row. If you've ever seen Gallagher, the comedian, the front row, he would always smash like watermelon and stuff. And so the front row always showed up with like big plastic sheets in front of them and wearing raincoats and stuff. Everybody's like, who's Gallagher? At least all the young people are. Look him up. Second thing is God's activity gives us a voice into other generations. And command them, saying, take up for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan. So the Jordan's dry. The Ark of the Covenant's there. And God says, go get 12 men, one from each tribe, and go grab a stone from out of the middle of the river and take it to your camp. And it's going to have to be big enough that you hold it on your shoulder. Now, when I first read this, I didn't catch that little line. It's take up a stone on his shoulder. I'm thinking like little stones this big. But this is like a big stone that they had to put on their shoulder, and they carried it. And so all of these 12 men come walking into the camp. And boom, and they probably made some little altar or whatever. And it says, this shall be a sign among you when your children ask later, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall say to them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. Our friends live in Israel, and one time they went camping in the desert. And I'm talking about the desert, no scrub brush, no little twig, nothing out there. And Yoni and his family go there. I mean, they drove for hours, and they go out into this excluded place, and it's flat. You can see for miles and miles and miles. Think Lawrence of Arabia type thing. And they set up stones for their campsite, and they camped there with the tent and stuff. And they were there for like 4 days, and they just had a great time just wandering the desert. And I'm like, that sounds like the exact opposite of a place that I want to go. But it was kind of cool because they left, and the next year they went back, and they drove to that same spot. Those stones were still there. Nobody had touched them. Why? Because it's way out in the middle of nowhere, and who wants to camp in the desert? So imagine how long those stones were there by Jericho, by the Jordan River, long enough that their kids were able to say, and it doesn't just say kids, it says to their sons of Israel forever. So God was doing something there. There's a phrase that we have, lest we forget. A lot of us think about 9/11 when we think of that. Other people think about the Holocaust. We can't forget is the phrase. We can't forget. In Saving Private Ryan, one of the sergeants, everywhere they'd land, he'd go and he'd get some soil from that beach, and he'd put it in a little canister, and he'd put it in his backpack. And so they had landed at like 3 or 4 different beaches, and so his backpack was probably getting heavier and heavier. But he was keeping those so that he could have them later on. I have a candle holder at home that I got when I was in Kazakhstan. It's interesting because I can still take that candle. Now, this is going to sound really weird, but I can smell the inside of it, and it smells like Kazakhstan. And all these memories come back to me of the mission trip that I took in Kazakhstan from 1992. And ironically, the inside of that candle holder still smells like Kazakhstan. And so memories are so important. We have a 9/11 memorial. We have Yad Vashem. Gettysburg, in essence, is a memorial. There's the Auschwitz Memorial. We even have a Memorial Day, an entire day that we're supposed to remember what goes on. There's the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and if you have never been there, you should find a time to go there. And you go in, and they take you to the top floor, and basically the way that it's built is you kind of wind your way down through the different floors. But they have certain rooms where all it is it's like pictures of people. And what had happened is there was a little shtetl in Poland, and it had something like 1,000 people in the shtetl, or 500 people or whatever. And they brought in this photographer to photograph the entire town. And so everybody kind of pitched in money to have this photographer to come in and take pictures of this entire town. And when he did, he had pictures of the butcher and the baker and candlestick maker. But pictures of life in that town and stuff. The very next day, the Nazis came in, hauled everybody off. Not one person lived from that town. And so as you're going down this thing, you go into certain rooms, and it's pictures of all these people. Why do they have that museum, and why do they do that? So that we'll remember. Because memorializing and remembering is important. I love telling my kids stories. They love me telling stories about when I grew up, as though it were like 900 years ago. Daddy, tell me a story about when you grow up. Well, the truth is, I used to ask my dad the same thing, and he told me stories about when he grew up, when he was chiseling on his chisel and making stone tablets for school and stuff like that. When dirt was still rocks, yeah. My dad's smiling, so I'm okay. I will survive the day. One of their favorite stories is I was little, probably about Rachel's age or maybe a little younger. No, I was probably about 8 years old. And I had this bicycle, and it was what we called banana bikes. And it had this big banana seat. And if you look up like 70s bikes, you'll find them. They were all over the place. And it had the handlebars that kind of went up like this. And there was like a little bell on the handlebars. And then it had like little streamers coming out of the handlebars. And the back tire was a little bigger than the front tire. And it was about the time that BMX bikes were starting to come out. And we got up on this hill, and all of my friends and I, we made this double humped jump. And it was like one hump and two humps. And we're all racing down. Now, a lot of my friends had BMX bikes, and then some of us didn't. None of the ones without the BMX bikes were willing to go over that. And I was like, I'm going to be the first. And so I start going down this thing, and right before I got to the jump, I hesitated, just a little bit. And I was like, oh, that's a big jump. And I went up, and my back tire got up, and on the second hump, so there's like two humps, the second hump, my back tire hit the front end of that second hump, flipped it up. I went head over heels and got wedged in the handlebars of that bike, and the front tire like rubbing on my chin. And I'm going along, my hands are spread out. I'm literally like Supermaning it. how was I going to stop? And finally the bike slowed down enough and I fell over. And I've got a black streak from here all the way down to my belly button. And my shirt was torn. And I've got skinned elbows and skinned knees. And my friends are all over me. Are you okay? And like, it hurt so bad. And then I come home and I go inside. And Mom starts laughing. Because I had this big black streak. She's like, what happened to you? My kids love that story, and so I can tell it over and over. I mean, it's a funny story. It really is. Needless to say, that Christmas I got, or later that year, I got a BMX bike. Thank you, Jesus. I still love that bike. We can't forget to tell them those stories. What if we forget what God has done, and we never tell our kids those stories? We haven't gotten the rocks out of the middle of the river. We haven't done our job. Third thing is God will give the next generation their moment. They're not just going to hear about our moment. They're going to have their moment. Then Moses reached out with his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right and on their left. You see, this wasn't the first time that the waters were stopped for the Israelites, but it was the first time that the waters were stopped for these Israelites. These are kids that had never seen that. All they had heard were the stories. And you know what? God made it different enough with the Jordan River. It wasn't on the right and the left. It was just on one side. And then God says, I want you to take stones out of the middle. God made it different for them, but he gave them their moment. So we get faith. We get stirred up for God. We get how God is amazing. And we start telling our kids all these stories. They've heard stories about people getting saved and people getting healed. And when God answered my prayer, when I got a bee sting one time, a wasp sting one time, and it started to hurt, and I just said, Jesus, can you heal me right now? And it went away. That's a small story, but it gave me some faith. And so when I tell my kids, they're like, well, maybe I can pray for my owie, whatever it happens to be. And then they have their own experience with God. And they hear God and they see God and something stirs inside of them. And then they have faith. Do you realize that 71% of the kids today vote the way their parents do? If the parents drive a Jeep, it is more than likely that their kids are going to drive a Jeep. If the parents are a fanatic of the Denver Broncos, then their kids are more than likely going to be a fanatic of the Denver Broncos. Kids want to follow what their parents do, unless their parents are complete morons. Unless their parents don't care about the kids, or they're so messed up in their thinking, maybe politically or socially or with regard to their friends, or maybe they just live for Jesus on Sunday mornings, but they go home and they treat their kids like garbage, they treat their wife like garbage, and they complain about their boss. And well, why would the kids? That's the 29% that don't vote the way that their parents do, that don't do what their parents do, because they're like, I am not doing that, I am doing this. And there's 29% out there who have rejected their parents that we can reach, because what they're rejecting they see doesn't work. And we can reach those 29% and point them to God. And then our kids that we're investing in, we can point them to God as well and say, it really is real. And here's how you know he's going to act in your life. Sarah and I love to watch movies with our kids. When they experience something, we experience something. Like, I will never forget the feeling of going to Star Wars the first time. 1976, standing in line at the Cooper Theater in Denver, Colorado, doesn't exist anymore, and walking in there and seeing this movie there was a line around the theater twice, and going in there and seeing this world, this universe that I had never seen before, and all I could think about was Star Wars for like the next, well, let's see, how long has it been since 1976? Because I still haven't stopped thinking about it. It impacted me for the rest of my life. I'll tell you what, your kids see someone's leg grow back because God healed it, they're not going to forget about that. And they're going to be like, holy smoke, God is doing something. But if we forget to tell them, if we forget to bring them, or if we just decide, school's more important, politics are more important, going to church is more important, rather than God and his ways are more important, they're not going to get it. Let's go ahead and have the worship team come up. When our kids experience something that we've experienced, there's this bonding that goes on. Like watching them watch, Abby and I watched Jaws together. And now Jaws is a little cheesy. I mean, you see the big shark and you can tell it's animatronic or whatever, but there's still something about it. And it was fun for us to joke about it and laugh about it and stuff. And can you imagine sitting around joking and laughing about, oh, did you see that blind man today? He got healed. That was amazing. Man, my friend Jeremiah, he just got saved today. That's awesome. There's two things that happen when we follow God. And I've talked about some other things, but these are the last two. This is what it's going to do to you. In Joshua chapter 3, it says, "Now the Lord said to Joshua, 'This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so that they will know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you.'" So Joshua was probably thinking, oh, good, I'm getting an opportunity. I'm going to follow God, and people aren't going to look at me as Moses' aide. Because that's what he was. He was the guy, he followed the legend. He was the guy that followed the legend. He was the backup quarterback that came in, and they're like, oh, he's no Peyton Manning. Oh, he's no Brett Favre. Oh, he's no Tom Brady. And this is what it says in the next chapter. They've gone through the river. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel. That's good. So that they revered him just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. The people loved Joshua as much as Moses. Why? Because it wasn't about Joshua. It was about God. You want people to revere you? Make it all about God. You want people to respect you? Make it all about God. You want people to say, man, their life is so different, there must be a God, because why would they live that way? And then the curiosity gets them. Let's go ahead and stand up. The second thing, this is crazy. Then the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap, a great distance away from Adam. Adam was the name of a town in that area. The city that is beside Zarethan. And those which were flowing down toward the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, which is also called the Dead Sea, were completely cut off. And then this little phrase that's forgotten. So the people crossed opposite of Jericho. Can you imagine everybody in Jericho standing on the walls looking at this? What in the name is that? All these stories we've heard, it's real. I can't believe it. I'm filled with wonder. I don't get it. I don't understand it. They all saw it. You know what that's called? Good news. In the movie Ratatouille, everybody loves Ratatouille. It's such a great movie. If you've not seen it, I am sorry for you. There's a scene, the imagery and the way they directed it is just like amazing. I'm really into filmmaking and love how they do filmmaking and stuff. And there's the critic named Anton Ego is his name. And they show him in his office, and his office is shaped like a coffin. And his shadow is shaped like a coffin when they show him going through the room. And he's hunched over, and Peter O'Toole actually does his voice, and it's this very critical voice and stuff. And it gets to the climax of the movie, and the rat, who is the cook, anyone can cook, and so this rat learns how to cook, and he's got this gift to cook. But who wants a rat in the kitchen? Anton Ego is the critic, and he's wanting to see